Time being
Recording in progress.
7:02, it's time to bring the April 17th meeting of the Finance Committee to order. First, we have 2 members on Zoom, 5 in chambers, 1 at Disney World, and 1 unknown at the moment. Do we have any public comment? I don't see the usual crowd is here. Approval of minutes.
Yeah, motion to approve the minutes from, it looks like December 13th and February 7th.
Second.
Oh, no, we gotta do a roll call.
Are you,
can
Nicole,
do
you
it
gonna run the roll
first.
call? Okay, great, thank you.
Yeah, I can do it. George, who are we missing? Is it just Lauren?
Lauren is, yes, she's in Disney World, and I don't see Chana on.
Looks like she
She just popped on.
Okay, she's on now.
Yep. Okay, all right, roll call. George,
Yes,
Natalie,
Yes.
Nicole is yes. Heather,
Yes.
John,
Yes.
William,
Yep.
and Chenna.
Chana?
Oh, she's on mute.
She must be on mute.
Yeah, do we just record as a
Chenna, you're on mute if you can hear us.
Yes.
That was Mike. It was Mike.
That was, oh, and Mike, I'm sorry.
Sorry, were you waiting for me? I had audio issues.
Yes, just for the approval of minutes, Chenna.
Oh, yes, sorry.
Nope, you're good, thank you.
Okay,
All right, that's it.
motion passes. Town fiscal policies. Review and approve the draft 2024 financial policies. Mr. Helen.
Yeah, through Mr. Chairman to the committee. So, 2 meetings ago, we had a vibrant discussion on some of these policies. We went back and I want everybody to know I did the best I could to do a track changes version so everyone could see every edit. But the track changes became like literally impossible to read. And so I gave the old policies with the new ones. This is one of the council goals for the year, and we do every 2 years. You will see a lot of the feedback that was given from this committee incorporated in there. And then if you look down a little further, you'll see some financial reserves. You'll see a couple of additional bullet points in there relative to using school revolving funds before the budget stabilization to preserve our AAA bond rating, and a couple of other items that were added in. We also we added in the stormwater section, which we said we were going to do, which is just simply saying stormwater fees will support the requirements. So we went through and did a full house cleaning. Amy is a fantastic editor as well, so we tried to clean up a little bit, but really, when the budget and fiscal analyst position starts, getting all of our financial policies together and really reviewing these and bringing them to a new level is something we're going to have that person work on in the next couple of years. We do this in our spare time, with the central office staff. I will note on number 9, snow and ice budget, you'll notice in there another addition, excess snow and ice revenues will be deposited in snow and ice stabilization account. People are going to see a little more about that, but we have about, this year, our snow and ice budget still has about $700,000 left over. I know it sounds awesome. I know people want to rate it. It's a bad idea. And when people see the operating budget dynamics, and when we talk later on about possibly no override passing or structural deficits, what we want to do is take that leftover snow and ice removal money and put it into a stabilization account so there's an additional $1 million of surplus, so that if we ever do have an emergency or there are cuts, we have excess there so we don't have to dip into other reserves. This is just smart finance, and that these policies reflect that. And so I'm happy to answer any questions that folks have. I'm just going through the bigger highlights that are on here.
I have some questions for you.
But go ahead, yeah.
Under compensation and benefits, 3rd bullet. That kind of reads like it is in the financial policy. It should be in the hiring process as opposed to Is this saying the policy is to give those benefits?
I think the comment at the last meeting from a few members was just simply around trying to define exactly benefits. It is in our employment manual. You can look it up online. In fact, half the manual is the benefits manual. But I think as a policy, the previous policy had almost nothing here. Number two, it also didn't define the compensation and classification plan, and that was a comment that came out from the committee as well. So we just added those 2 bullet points in there to just give it a little bit of context. I think it's obvious, but I think it made sense to try to just define that, a little bit more clearly and briefly.
Okay, then on item 4, second bullet, short-term revenue surpluses shall fund non-recurring projects. What are short-term revenue surpluses that would be big enough to fund a non-recurring project?
So if,
And not go into free cash?
well, that's a good question. So, let's say a bid for a project came in $100,000 under budget. And the Barron Road reconstruction project is $100,000 over budget, right, when the bid comes in. We would use the excess money here to make sure that we could still do that project so we don't delay that project another year. That policy allows and focuses on that. That was something that Mr. Nutting was pretty passionate about, and I agreed with him. We solve problems a lot of times in the middle of the year, unlike going to municipal town meeting in small towns where you have to then wait a whole nother year to get a dog park. Mr. Nutting was always fond about the dog park. People came in and said, oh, we need a dog park. And he said, okay, we'll go design it and we'll go look at the budget. Is there an area in the budget, maybe in the DPW, where there was a gap where somebody left and we didn't fill a job for 3 months? And then there's a surplus there, and he went and spent the money to build a dog park. Instead of coming back and waiting a whole year to get an appropriation, you just end up solving the problem mid-year. That's what that policy is designed to do.
Okay, so then the council has to vote that?
No,
No, just a
No.
budgetary transfer within, all right. I noticed the stabilization account went from 6 million.
Yep.
To 7.
it's 5% of our current $140 million
So it's a
budget.
percentage of the,
You technically don't need the dollar in there, but it's always been in there. We've always said 5%. So I upped that number because we should start thinking in the next few years, especially given the fact that we tried to deposit free cash into stabilization accounts this year, and obviously the schools and the regular budget need the one-time revenues. But I just added 7 million in there just because that's 5% of 140 million.
okay. I'm just,
Yep.
maybe it doesn't need a number, it needs just a percent.
Take the 7 million out,
Well, I don't,
but it's
that we
6.5
don't have
dozen
to
the other.
modify them all the time and do all that stuff. Continuing down, budget stabilization fund, the first item, used to overcome short-term operating budget shortfalls.
Where is that? What?
That's under budget stabilization fund, item under 4, budget stabilization fund number I guess it is, used to overcome, the budget stabilization fund is used to overcome short-term operating budget shortfalls. I thought it was, my impression is to get money out of the stabilization fund, it requires action of the council?
Yep.
And is that, okay, so that's,
It's your rainy day account.
yeah, what would you, that's not the big one, is it? That's the
Nope.
$7 million one, right?
The general stabilization account is what I always refer to as your Dust Bowl account. That's for the Great Depression to ration money to do basic needs. That also is literally your foundation to your AAA bond rating. That's one of the things that a bond rating agency looks very carefully at. If you don't keep up with a certain policy and maintain that, that's a bad look on a bond rating
So what
agency.
would you consider?
The budget stabilization fund is exactly what we did in 2018 and 2019. We had $2 million in the budget stabilization fund, and because of those short-term budget shortfalls, Sue remembers, we drained all the money out in those 2 years to patch the budget gaps that year. Those 2 years, excuse me. So it's short-term,
Yeah,
right?
okay, I just wanted to make sure at least, we had an explanation of some kind. school department should maintain a minimum target of $1 million in surpluses for unforeseen emergencies. Is that the revolving funds?
Those are revolving funds. Their policy would be, internally, their policy is to have a full year of revolving funds as surplus. So I'm just picking a number, this is not accurate. If there was $3 million in revolving funds annually, their policy would be to keep an entire year's worth of stabilization accounts in case, again, on some unforeseen circumstance beyond belief, like we haven't had any of those recently, that they would have a full year of surplus. This policy for the town does not relate to the school policy. What I'm simply saying is, and we'll get to this in a few minutes, if the school department, as this conversation goes on with this budget year and the community starts beginning the discussion of an override, the budget stabilization money that's in our stabilization account is very much key to our bond rating. It's right in there in the Standard & Poor's reports. It is always going to be inclination to go get reserves from somewhere else before you take a look at your own reserves. To maintain our AAA bond rating, we need to make sure that if there are school deficits or an override doesn't pass or there's other stuff that they need to look at their revolving funds first, and that also makes sure that they look at their fee structure first before coming into the budget stabilization fund. This is exactly what happened in 18 and 19. We drained those monies with the off-the-record promise that an override committee would get together and start working toward an override. And obviously that didn't happen for 4 or 5 years. So ultimately, we drained those accounts, put the town at financial risk in our bond rating, which raises interest rates when we borrow, and actually takes more money out of our operating budget to fund all the stuff we need. So there needs to be some level of leverage in policy to say, you know what? If there's a shortfall, an override doesn't pass, or there are cuts that are coming, regardless of the context, whether it's this year or 5 years down the road, it's incumbent upon the school department to make sure that they tap into revolving funds first before coming to the town for the budget stabilization account. Because once we come to the budget stabilization account, like in 2018 and 2019, that went to zero, okay? And that's why Mr. Nutting always told us there's no way Franklin will ever have a AAA bond rating status. And I'm sorry, this is exactly what bond rating agencies say. And the fact that we became a AAA bond rating community in the middle of the pandemic is a huge achievement on the discipline of the departments and the staff to be able to finance that. And so ultimately, you need some level of accountability and threshold in some sort of policy to make sure that that point is clear. I hope that makes sense.
Could I ask a question on that? Is that okay?
Yeah, absolutely.
Is that right? What you were just describing when you said the town drained the stabilization fund, correct? And,
Yep.
and then it hurt our rating. If the school drains theirs,
Yep.
how does that impact the town?
It doesn't.
Nothing.
No, because the bond rating agencies don't look at school revolving funds.
But do they
as
look
a-
at the different
as a
accounts and
financial-
say this one's been drained, and so?
They don't look at, the bond rating
No.
agency wouldn't look at the school department's reserves and say that's a deficiency that we're gonna give you a bond rating on.
Okay, and then, given that we have the AAA bond rating and it's really important to have, is there anything, and sorry if this is off topic, so just
No,
tell me if it
absolutely.
is. I'm wondering, in the most recent years since we've had this rating, what have we seen, what have we obtained because we have that rating? What is a benefit that
The
this
main
town has
benefit
seen?
that we've had thus far, is on interest rates. So we went out to borrow for, like, in this case, for the open space parcels,
Okay,
we got a much lower interest rate, which saves hundreds of thousands and or millions depending on what you're borrowing. But when you go out for like a police station project or a new school, that's when your interest rate as a AAA bond rating really saves taxpayers absolutely millions and millions and millions of dollars.
when did we obtain the AAA rating?
2 years ago.
And since that time, we've done just the open space with it at the.
That's correct.
For the advantage.
Two fire
Twi-
trucks. too.
Twice, and the fire trucks,
Oh,
my bad, you're
okay,
right.
right.
That's a good
Okay.
point.
I
The
remember
one,
the rate. It was
well, the one fire truck, the ladder truck, you're right.
No, we bought the twin.
In the ambulance or
Twin
something too?
engines, and the rate was 1.44,
Right.
I think.
Okay,
Yeah.
thank you.
Yeah.
No, and just so you know too, Heather, one
Yeah.
quick point. We were never a AAA bond rating community.
No, clear.
And
yeah.
so the 2018 and 19 didn't actually like deduct the bond rating or hurt it. It just put us at a disadvantage to try to obtain it.
And so by establishing stabilization funds is how we were able to obtain that within just a
there's
few
several
short
reasons.
years?
Reserves are always
Reserves, yeah.
a key factor. Another factor was the Community Preservation Act, and what we would see on the next round is the tri-county vote. When voters go out to the polls and vote to increase revenues like that, those are very, very favorable because it shows that voters, there's surety in the marketplace that if you did have a problem, that you could still go to the ballot and those are successful and voters are willing to increase and take money out of their pockets to pay for something. Voter-initiated ballot initiatives are a huge factor. And the third thing I would say is our clean audits. You know, all of our financial audits, you know, have been exceptionally well done for a bunch of years. You know, all those financial practices, and you can go read the bond rating. We have them on the budget
I
website.
probably will.
No, you should. No, they're a huge point of pride. I mean,
Yeah.
you know, we were like, I don't remember, Carrie, like maybe the 70th town or something like that in Massachusetts to get AAA. I mean, you know, don't get me wrong. Like, I'm not sitting around at my managers' conferences being like, hey, you know, this is so awesome. It's not bragging rights, right? Like, because trust me, a lot of my other colleagues are like, yeah, we had that 40 years ago, right? But it's really about dollars and cents. And when you're ready to do the Remington Jefferson borrowing, the Horace Mann roof in another year, you know, Kerry and I are sitting there hoping inflation is stabilized so the Federal Reserve will start chipping away at interest rates. Why? Because then when we have the 144 for the land, you know, we're hoping that instead of the 4% now, we're hoping that we can, when we go out to borrow for those projects, we could get under 3.
Okay.
That's a huge, as I'm sure you know, a percent difference is a huge amount of
Yeah.
money when you're borrowing, you know, $10 million.
Thank you. Sorry if I
No,
interrupted you.
Those are all great questions because I think
Okay.
they help hopefully people that are watching at home
Yeah,
understand why these things
Because
are
I'm just,
important.
I understand the point of saying, okay, schools, you know, dip into your own before you come
Yeah.
here, I guess, but, I'm curious if the schools have that, to do that.
And just, that's why I say, where legal.
Where
Number
legal,
one.
okay,
And
yeah.
number two, just for the record, I want the school department to have flourishing reserves.
Yeah, would be
It
great.
is excellent policy, but as you will learn, Heather, we are not anywhere near that position right now. Okay? So we have some very hard conversations to have with the public. I want them to have reserves. The school business administrator has done a great job managing those monies. Fantastic job. But before we go put the taxpayer at a larger peril, it's important for us to ask them, why do they have so many reserves? What kind of reserves could they give up? And what do they see as their future expenditures before we start going into this? I also, at a minimum, don't believe anywhere below $1 million for them is a sound idea at all. They do need to have their own kind of quote-unquote stabilization amount of money for sure. They cannot drain their entire amount. That you just can't do that. So that's why there's at least some floor in there to say they need to keep at least $1 million.
And we ask for the fire engine stabilization account. Do we ask for any other departments to have a stabilization account as well?
No, the only other one is the recreation fields.
Yeah.
Both of those are long-standing ones because generally when you get the ball fields and the fire trucks, as we just did, you know, the fire truck was, well, right now it's probably 2.9 million. You know, you don't really want to borrow for that. So those are really more savings bank, piggy banks
Okay.
that Jeff created a long time ago. And we've just been trying to contribute to offset those costs down the line.
Gotcha.
I have
In
a
cash.
question on that. Is there an inflationary example? Fire truck is $100,000 a year. Hopedale just bought one
Yeah.
for $900,000. And it wasn't a fancy one. And on the other side, the ambulance,
Yeah.
we're doing
50.
150. the one we just bought was 420, and they buy them about every
4 years.
third?
3 or 4 years. Yeah,
Yeah.
but Jim gets another year out of them, usually.
Okay.
So even 3 years, 150 times 3 is 450. There's your ambulance.
Okay, every 10 years on, 10 years you might cover a fire truck. That's all.
Yeah.
Anything else, Heather?
Sorry, no, maybe somebody.
Anybody?
Thank you.
Me, I got more, they don't. We just talked about that. All right, this is the last bullet in 4. Establish a property acquisition stabilization account for the purposes of non-Community Preservation Act related property. I think we have one now.
We don't.
We don't. There's
We
something.
have a public, I think, I can't even remember it.
Yeah, it's
The-
something I
no,
saw the
it's
list
it's
of.
like the public property and buildings facilities.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
there's a stabilization account that in our view is useless for facilities. There's a couple $100,000 left in that account, but contributing to that stabilization account is useless. Why? There's such a high demand for technology and facilities money that to put money into that account, you're just then gonna spend it right away because there's such a high need in all of that stuff. What is here is the property acquisition we don't have. And if we ever needed land for a police station, you have to go out and borrow money, interest rates, to buy a piece of land. So trying to chip away at, again, kind of the same thing as like the fire truck or the fields, is like we know the cost of replacing the fields is gonna be so expensive. Let's just have a savings piggy bank over there, and every year in free cash, deposit a certain amount of money if there's anything left over, and at least we can start adding up to try to offset. Just like when you go buy a house, what do they tell you? 20% down payment, right? So if you're gonna go buy a piece of land, have at least on hand 20%. You know, I didn't wanna say that is necessarily a threshold, but this is just to start the account. But you deposit in there, and then maybe eventually you have a down payment on a piece of property if something really came up. Again, non-open space related, non-historic preservation, non-related to CPA.
So I've asked it before, and I don't know whether I remember or not. Property acquisition on the stabilization account list is 300,
It's not acquisition though, it's
300
facilities
grand.
maintenance.
huh?
It's not
It
for
says
acquisition,
property acquisition.
Yes, you're correct.
but that's not what
But
it
that's
was.
not
Oh, it
accurate.
is, it's
That's-
not
I will
accurate.
change it. Make
Okay,
it
so
less
this is-
confusing.
Is this to fix things?
Yeah,
Or some,
that's like an emergency boiler problem or something of that sort.
all right, I'll buy that. Not done.
I hope it doesn't happen, but
Long-term debt. It says reserved for large capital projects over $1 million. What typically, how long would the loan, what are we looking at in terms of the length of the debt? Do we have any idea, or does it depend on what we're doing?
depends on what we're doing. If you're doing a high school, it's 40 years. We traditionally, Jeff, again, to his credit, I give him all the credit in the world, and I agree with him, you really want to do 20. The fire truck, we did 10, because that was a lower amount at the 2 million, right? But for Remington Jefferson, I mean, I can't speak right now for the borrowing aid, but if you're to do we're gonna propose eventually probably a $10 million borrowing authorization at the end of May. We're cleaning our books off right now, by the way, too, from previous authorizations. We're just doing a whole house cleaning. The two big projects are Remington Jefferson and the Horace Mann roof. It's probably gonna be about $10 million that we'll have to authorize the borrowing for that. I think, 20 years?
Yeah, so we'll.
Maybe 10, but probably 20.
I have to review with them and they give me their advice.
Right.
And that's why I would do the numbers for, this is what it's for 20 years and this is what it is for 30 years.
But we hate interest. Hate it. Can't stand it.
Depends on which way it's going.
Not in the town's favor. It's never in our favor. Interest sucks the life out of the budget. So you want to try to pay that stuff off as best you can and not try the best of your ability to not have it drag out for more than
So-
20 years.
The shortest possible term.
The shortest possible term.
Can I ask a follow-up question on that? Because I know one of the the objectives as well, it's just not on here, and I don't know if it's worth it, is kind of to maintain kind of your like your debt service, so that you don't have cliffs and valleys. I don't know if it's worth kind of putting a bullet related to that, just because I think it's such a great policy that I feel like, unless it's somewhere else.
No, it's the second bullet, Natalie. Actually,
Okay.
and it's not explicit,
Oh,
but
okay,
it's
got it. I
3%.
just
And I
wasn't-
actually dropped that 0.5% because I've given up on my goal of 3.5%.
Got it, okay. I
But
just
given
wasn't
where our
getting it.
facilities are, now you're spot on. Like, we are in a valley.
Yeah.
I've been, ranting about this for 5 years, right? We're in a valley. We're now at like 1.5% of our operating budget is debt service. Part of that's just an innocent place because, to the town's credit, for 20 years, particularly when Jeff got here, his focus was on infrastructure and facilities. So you front loaded a lot of that, and when you look at the budget schedule on debt exclusions, you can see them all they've all been coming off the schedule. Keller Sullivan's been coming off, all that stuff, because those were all 20-year notes. So they're all starting to slide off. Even the library is getting close to sliding off. All those projects that they even did in-house are sliding off. And as a result, the percentage of the overall budget that's now going to debt, it's not a cause for concern necessarily, but in FY26, when we borrow for 10 million at 3.5% if interest rates don't go down, you're going to start to see that pie get eaten up a lot more, as you know. So I dropped that to 3% target, but we're now at 1.5, so we're even half of our target, which is, we're in a big valley right now for
Yeah,
sure.
okay. Makes sense.
Okay, capital improvement program, last bullet. Bonds will be used for large capital projects over $1 million unless it can be paid off in 5 years. Is that pay it off from free cash? From the 3% up in the long-term debt? So it goes in, that statement puts it into the 3% goal?
Exactly.
Okay.
And it could be a variety of, so free cash is most likely, could be grants, could be settlement monies, could be, could be a whole variety of one-time revenue sources. Doesn't have to be just free cash.
Okay, I think you mentioned snow and ice, that's a new one, and we're gonna contribute basically what, you're gonna cap it at $1 million. Okay, that's new though.
That's just for,
That's something, the council has to establish the
Yep.
stabilization account.
It would just be for the snow and ice purpose, right?
right. You can actually deficit spend by state law for snow and ice, but that again is a bad idea.
Is the snow and ice, is it defined when I mean, what, snow and ice, I don't know. Is it just like the
Salting of
gas for
roads.
the
Yeah,
trucks and
yeah.
the, oh, all right,
Yeah,
okay, I
it's-
mean,
It's the labor.
labor
it's-
too.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah,
it's the
so I
lab-
think that's
yep.
what I'm looking at, is like
Yep.
what encompasses snow and ice, I don't know.
Materials.
Yeah, is it
Uh,
listed somewhere, cause I can just look it up if it is, I just
No, it's,
feel like it should be defined, because if we're going to,
it's defined
move
in
this
Mass General
money.
law. I just don't
Okay.
have like the law reference.
That's fair.
I'm just
Okay,
trying to
that's fair.
convey, capital items on, so what wouldn't be spent out of that account, that's just general operations of what you see. It's not sidewalk, it's basically labor and expenses, okay? Just for ease.
yeah,
Capital money for the trucks, the plows, sidewalk plows, that does not come out of this.
okay,
This is literally just labor and expenses, salt, sand, and labor, the brine, those expenses that are in the operating budget. And I apologize, Heather, it's just defined in state law, but I don't know exactly how, but it's not capital, it's just the basic stuff to get rid of snow and ice off the streets and
that's
stuff.
what I was just thinking, could it ever be confusing to somebody, let's pretend, none of us are here. And somebody picked it up and said, oh, we have $700,000 in this account for snow and ice. Let's buy a new plow, or let's do this or that with it. I mean, would we
Well, when the
define
stabilization
that?
account gets set up, it'll be defined to
That'll be defined,
follow, right, it would have,
Okay.
the attorney will write it in a way that'll define it within the statute of the law.
Okay,
And I understand what you're saying, but in
Yeah.
municipal circles, like for Amy and I, when you say snow and ice,
you know,
whether you guys are here, we're not here,
Yeah.
who's sitting in these seats will go, they'll know exactly what that is.
gotcha, thank you.
Okay, last one. OPEB. increased by $50,000 a year. Pretty soon that's gonna be, well, it'll be 600,000 next year, 650,000.
8,
Is there a cap envisioned?
nope,
I can,
not
so-
until our liability's filled.
Which is what, $70 million or something?
69 or $70 million, yeah.
Which we'll never see paid off.
Well, I don't know about that, but I share some of your cynicism.
Yeah. All right, I lost my agenda. Current FY '22, no, we did that.
Oh, right. I mean, George, so Steve wants me to point out for the record, when Norfolk County, if Norfolk County pension system becomes fully funded in the next decade, he's got his fingers crossed too, that's where my cynicism truly kicks in. If it's ever fully funded, any additional money that's in the operating budget that goes to the Norfolk pension system would then be redirected towards OPEB. And Steve's pointing this out because our consultant, Dan Sherman, points this out like he did earlier in February when we came to present. He was giving us optimistic news, but I just feel like it's so much money, you know, and the pension system rules could change, but I think they said in 2029 or 2030. 2030, so that's not too far down the line. So some of the pension money in the budget may be able to be rolled over into OPEB, and you may be able to change this policy in 4 or 5 years.
All right. I could beat,
I don't make the rules, I just follow.
I could beat the OPEB guru to death. Okay. The FY '25 budget proposal.
So you gotta first vote on the policies, so I can send them to the council.
Okay. Motion.
Do we need any changes or, okay, just a motion to approve, the financial town policies, the 2024 town financial policies as presented.
Second.
There was a change, right?
Did we change anything, Jamie, that you would change?
I didn't
I
catch
think you were
any.
gonna X out the 7 million and just keep it.
Oh, yeah, I could do that.
That's not a big deal, but just
Yeah.
to note, I don't know.
Yep. Yeah, we'll take out the 7 million number.
Sorry to interrupt you.
So that was good, because it's good to know.
Okay.
So, motion with the 7 million struck, but otherwise as presented.
Second.
Nicole?
Did I hear a second? Sorry, it was late. Did someone second that?
Yes, Mike
Yep.
did.
Okay, sorry, I couldn't hear. George?
Yes.
Natalie?
Yes.
Nicole is yes. Heather?
Yes.
John?
Yes.
William?
Yes.
Chenna?
Yes.
And Mike?
Yes.
All set.
Okay, now, the budget.
Oh, short slideshow. Just to give everybody a quick update. Budget's released. Anybody watching at home, there's the link, 315 pages. I hope everybody gets to it before next Wednesday. So some good news, I just wanted to give everybody an up-to-date, the state budget situation. So the House Ways and Means budget came out this past week, and actually their proposed budget is a $200,000 increase, okay, over what was in my budget proposal, as we do every year, just for people that are watching at home, if anybody. We always use the governor's budget in our budget model, and through the year, we kind of update it. I just want to note the House hasn't passed the budget yet. It's just in their proposal. So that number will probably tweak up a little bit in the Senate in May. We'll stay abreast. But this is really good news, right? Because that's going to offset some of the money that will be needed, down the line for the schools. Speaker Mariano said it the other day, we all know the good fiscal times don't last forever. The town of Franklin also has to realize that good fiscal times don't last forever. Every city or town is dealing with this. 8 of the 9 past months at the state level, they've had tax collections lag behind predictions. I think we've seen it in the press. In FY26, that's predicted to be worse. So we can't view a day where the state's going to somehow bail anybody out of a lot of this. And it went to the level where the governor actually issued a hiring freeze. And like I say at the bottom, people think Franklin's the only one dealing with what we're talking about here. We're not. Every city or town is dealing with this. There are overrides all over Massachusetts. This is a structural problem that's probably going to get a lot more play, particularly around the cost drivers with schools. Just boiled down, if people don't want to read the 320 pages, the total operating budget is almost 141 million. 3.26 million is new tax levy revenue. That's, people always say this to me, that's it? I go, yeah, that's it. To balance this year's budget, we had to use $2 million in one-time revenues. It is critical for everybody to understand, going into FY26, we are already $2 million in deficit. Local receipts ticked up 1.1 million. These are estimates too with local receipts. I tell people all the time again, just because in May we want the money, Kerry and our finance team and Amy and all of us get gray hair every month, hoping that meals tax, hotel tax, you know, other fees and everything else, building fees, come in as predicted. I mean, I'm always like looking at the bottom line number going, are we hitting targets? I mean, we are out there pounding the pavement, making sure that the predictions that we make, we try to meet. People ask me all the time, like they have the last week, what happens if we don't meet predictions? We make cuts. And right now, if you don't meet predictions, we're here making budget cuts. And a lot of those revenues, I remind people too, are always, they're towards fees for service. So most of our fees support jobs, just like the revolving accounts for the schools support jobs. Like that's what they do. They're fee for service. I didn't correct this bullet point here. There was a loss of state aid. That's in my budget model is a loss of 76,000. But as you saw, the House Ways and Means budget has increased it. So we'll see how that shakes out, but that's good news. There is no new spending on the municipal budget in my budget proposal. There's nothing. I took out the sustainability coordinator. I took out 378,000 in DPW requests, and on down the line. The only thing that's in there for new spending are the 3 paramedics, which half of that revenue is accounted for by what they bring in ALS and BLS rates, and also their overtime budget went down. Okay? And as George knows, probably more than anybody, you have the 3rd ambulance to deal with the call volume during the peak times of 7A to 7P. And as you'll see in the budget narrative, and you've heard from the fire chief every year they just continue to break more and more records with all of their call volume. What does this mean for the Franklin Public Schools? Their appropriation in my budget is 74, just a hair under 75 million. And then there's 20 to 21 million, it's about 20.6 million in school-related costs in the municipal quote-unquote budget. So school costs represent 68% of the overall pie up top. They got a $3 million increase, which is the largest single-year increase in school history, tied with 2019. And I put down there some calculations so people understand. Level service budget increase for the schools this year was 7.3 million. If you take away the 3 million they have a deficit of 4.3 million. Same thing with the level service plus restoration of cuts, which is in the school department budget that they approved, which means the request was 9.3 million. They're getting 3 million in the municipal, in the town administrator budget, which means they have a deficit of 6.3 million based on the budget that they approved on April 9th. This does not include any one-time capital monies or school revolving funds. Those are off budget. You can't do it any better in one slide. I want to make sure I point out to folks, these are the historical numbers. So if you look at their annual increases, they've been doing pretty well actually for the last 6 years. They had a 5% increase in 19, 4.2% this year. Other than the one pandemic year, they've been getting over 2.5 to 3.5 to almost 5% every year. But if you look at the column in the middle to all the way to the right, or I mean the purple, excuse me, you'll see that the requests that the schools have been making, and this goes way back even further than this, they've been asking for increases that are even larger or almost the entire amount of money coming in. The public cannot be stunned nor shocked at the system and the debate we're in. They just can't be. Brian Chandler reads every single thing I write, and he knows this has been going on for 10 years. People ask me almost 5 times a day now, so I just have to finally get it out. What's the number we need to solve the problem? So I'm going to lay it out there before next week's meeting on the 24th, joint school and town council hearing at the chamber. So if you just take the numbers before I just said to you, if you assume the school budget at the 81 million they approved, they need 6.3 million more according to the budget that they just approved minus the money that they're getting in the town administrator's budget. School committee generously gave us a letter last week. It's in the finance committee packet explaining and asking the request to fund the whole budget at 81.3 million, which is a 6.3 million deficit. And they asked for the council to support this full budget and to try to do whatever we can to make up those revenues, which including an override. So if you request that the schools need 6.3 money and you add in the $2 million deficit you're already in from one-time revenues, and then you add in $500,000 for facilities who runs out of money every April now, because most people don't realize Mike's budget has been cut a bunch of times over the last few years since the pandemic, and he's never really restored his budget. He also has been hit the hardest by inflation for utility costs, right? By far, I think all of you are aware of that. His budget has gone up over $1.25 million in the last 2 years just due to inflation. We've turned off the water on all the fields. We've cut and cut and cut parts. We've cut a whole variety of things out of the facilities budget. He runs out of money. This is going to be the 3rd year in a row he runs out of money in his expense budget every April. The need from the school buildings is there. The need for the municipal buildings are there too. So you're really looking at, without talking about anything else on people's wish lists, just to meet the school budget demand, just to fill the $2 million void in one-time revenues, because we're already in deficit, and even if people don't want the $500,000 for facilities, I'm just laying it out there, you're in an $8.8 million deficit right now. These numbers do not include any cost drivers for FY26, including collective bargaining, as well as the RJ remodel and the borrowing that we just talked about. One thing that has stunned people, and I'm sure this will come up a lot more, when you go for an override, you have to tell the public what you're going to spend the money on. First of all, it's just good practice, or why would people open up their wallets and pocketbooks, right? But overrides, if you did an override now for FY25 for July 1, you can spell out what that money's for. But in year 2, the entire pot goes back into the general fund. So there's a misnomer and a myth out there that if you do an override for, say, $5 million for just the schools, they keep it forever. It doesn't work. Because even that money that you increase in $5 million then has an inflationary factor built off that, right? So people think that solves your problem forever. It doesn't. And people have to be very cognizant of this stuff, because if you look at towns that successfully do overrides, like Norwood a few years ago, Belmont last week, Needham a couple years ago, they spell out in year 1 what an override goes to, right? And generally, most of the time, it goes to schools, right? Because schools are the driver on this. And then in year 2 through 5, they spell out where the additional money is going. They lay it out so taxpayers know exactly what to expect, so we don't have anybody feeling like the rug was pulled out from underneath of them and say, well, that was our money forever. That's not the way it works. And the town attorney will explain this if need be next week. I think I'm scaring people enough, so just people have to realize, elected officials and appointed officials, we need all of you to encourage the schools and or us to strategically plan this stuff out. Otherwise, we think we know the answer, but we don't, and then 8 months down the road, we thought one thing and it wasn't that. can't emphasize this enough. We have a very unique system in this town. No other superintendent and town manager have offices next to each other like we do in this state. We are very lucky. Everything in the communication and everything we've been doing has been great. We still need more. Another question everybody asks me 100 times a day. What if an override doesn't pass? What's plan B? I wish I could put up here a slide that just said line item this, line item that. I ain't doing that because there's a lot of questions still yet to be answered. I.e., if an override were to be on in June and it failed, in my view, the level service plus restoration of cuts option should be off the table for right now because then we only have 2 weeks left to the start of the fiscal year to figure out how we're going to patch this budget deficit. I also think it's prudent to await the conclusion of the school comprehensive facilities analysis, which the superintendent and everybody's done a great job on. I think it's coming out within the next month. But that is a critical decision because I don't think anyone's unaware of the previous facility studies that were done that were saying to close more schools for the declining enrollment, to redistrict. Let's get everybody up and let's look at the entire district and let's see where we can have some economies of scale. Well, before the schools make staff cuts or before the municipality makes staff cuts, I think we need to know the answer to that to see if there are any economies of scale first. I don't want to be cutting things I don't want to cut if we don't have to. And finally, I'll just say to that, it's just time. We've been talking about this stuff. You've been on this committee for 12 years, George. You probably started your committee 10 years talking about this stuff. Sue, you were on the committee for 10 years. Just, we need to finally make a decision on these things, okay? Before we start slashing cuts all over the place, it's prudent to make sure that there's some economies of scales out there. If, again, looking at the model, right? Level service, you're still in deficit at 4.3 million. How do we make that up? Lucas, and I haven't had the time yet to make sure we coordinate a reply to this, but I think we need to evaluate other creative offsets before we make cuts. I think we have to do everything we can to make sure that we're not laying staff off and we're not moving the organization back in all the progress we've made, both on the town and schools. We need to reevaluate employee health care estimates and to make sure that those are the most up to date. And we will include in that model too the 200,000 we anticipate at least in more state aid. So the schools also, as you heard on the March 6th meeting, the school business administrator estimated, again I clause it by an estimate, okay? He estimated that there would be 4.7 million in surplus in the revolving accounts. Well, I think before we start cutting municipal services, I think we need to have a conversation with the schools about, well, how much more in reserves do you need? And can some of that patch some of the budget gap? Again, this is Plan B if an override didn't pass. The schools are also contemplating user fee increases. Well, I think before we start making cuts, I'd like to know, what are those fees? Are the schools going to increase them? Are there inflationary factors built in for school rental facility? I mean, I can't speak to this. I don't think school rentals, just of the facilities at schools, are those market-based? Are they up with the times? Are they covering the costs of the custodial contracts and all of the other pieces that have risen over the years? Are they adequately compensated to fee for service? And then people ask me all the time, well, what do we do? When do we make those changes? Well, June 26th is the last council meeting to make any budget adjustments before the fiscal year starts, which I think is in the best interest of everybody. But like last year, we can still, before school starts in September, there can still be budget adjustments made in July and August that will give the superintendent and the school committee answers to what they need to make sure they're planning appropriately for the whole school year. So I know that's not the nice list everybody's looking for, but I'm not going to put a list out there of cuts until some of these questions are answered and we have some finality to this stuff. People ask me all the time about fiscal forecast. This is a hard slide to read, but it's the next 5 years. And this is just the tax levy, so people can look at this slideshow later on when I post it online. It's pretty basic. The key piece is this. Look at the red on the bottom. If we did nothing, no overrides, no cuts, no fee increases, no new projects, no borrowing for Remington Jefferson, No exorbitant collective bargaining costs, let alone net zero, sustainability, roads, sidewalks, and I'm talking about nothing. Nothing. You're still in deficit right out of the gate in 26 at 2.3 million, same thing in 27, 28, 29, and 30. And this does not include the full price of the Tri-County School, which was a debt exclusion, so the revenue will be raised for that, but I'm just pointing that out. It does not include the police station either. People ask me all the time, how much is an override going to cost me? So here you go. I got a couple slides on this. This is just an override calculation based on the FY24 tax rate. It's all right there. 2 million, 3 million, 4 million, 6, 6.5, 7, 8, 9, and 10 million. So based on that, you see the override cost in the middle column. I put it in bold red with an asterisk, the next column. What people have to also recall, when you do an override, say for 5 million, it'll cost $409. But you also have to add on the 2.5% Prop 2.5 regular levy. So based on the FY24 number, okay, of $198 on average of a $650,000 home, the average property tax bill went up this year $198. So just to illustrate, even though, because we don't have an FY25 rate yet, because that tax rate hearing is this coming December in 24. But if you do an override, then it's 2.5% on top of that. I just want to make sure people understand the cost impact to people depending on the numbers.
Jamie,
Yep.
can I, the tax rate part that you just mentioned, it's usually in December that it's set, and I know that. So based on this, would you then wait till December to do the new
No.
rate, plus that you just wait, you do that when the vote happens? So
Well-
immediately, and then how does that, what budget does that, how does that work? How does that,
Very,
Filter in.
almost impossible for me to actually sit here and explain.
okay, then you don't have,
Like,
that's fine.
I'm trying to keep the vibe a little bit up.
Totally get it.
But-
I just,
but the Board of
but you don't
Assessors-
wait till December for people's
Right.
tax bills to go up. People's tax bills would, given this situation, would increase.
Your estimates are right, your actuals are the February and April bill, May bill, I bet. And it's April, so I'm thinking. And so you get the preliminaries in July and the
Yeah.
fall,
Yeah.
right? So an override would show up likely, if it was in June, on your preliminaries, but you would pay on the back half in January and the fall. The tax rate would get set in December, you would see the override amount, generally, again,
Yeah,
Right.
whatever it is, yeah.
override co- plus the 2.5, and your actuals a year from now
Yeah.
would reflect all of it.
And if.
The
if-
Board of Assessors or elected board, just for the public,
Yeah.
they certify the tax rate, they certify the valuations, they have their process, and they come before the town council and have their tax rate, you
And
know,
so
and that's
when that-
all, by the way, scripted out in state law.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
And that bill that goes out in January.
Yep.
Is, hits the budget type of
Do you
thing
wanna
in
explain?
July? Like retro back to July, is that?
I'll let Carrie explain the tax.
Okay,
rate.
sorry if,
That's okay, no, this is really good stuff, this is
Okay,
great stuff.
okay.
Can I jump in here for a
Yeah.
minute?
maybe you already know, I don't need to.
I think I have a sheet at home, I think I sent it to Kerry. I was invited to the group at the senior center,
Oh, nice, yeah.
2 months ago,
Yep.
when this set of tax bills came out. And there were some pretty smart people in that room. They were totally confused about the tax bill.
Yep.
Because the first two bills, the July bill and the September bill, or
November.
October bill,
November.
are on last year's tax rate.
November.
And then, so they're this, and then when the January bill comes out,
Yeah.
it suddenly bumps up.
Because
they're
it was
making
just
up for the
approved in
previous two
December.
quarters.
Right.
It's, no human.
Nobody gets it. Maybe
Nobody
Carrie
gets
does.
it, except that one, except that one over
Carrie
there.
definitely gets it.
But it's, when the year is done, the number's right.
All right.
Correct.
You're just paying
Magic.
different, you're paying some on last year's rate, and then the last two of the year are higher because they're making up for the first 2 months. So
Yeah.
it's not real, you gotta average it over the year and it's right.
You might be a treasurer collector someday, George.
Huh?
You could be a treasurer collector or something. Is that accurate, Gary?
Or assistant, because
It's just,
Terry's so good.
it's all timed on when things, I mean, we don't put the rate in until December, so you have to go back and fix it from July and then you add CPA on top of it, and it gets very confusing.
Yes. So the bills that are due in August and November are called preliminary. They're based on the previous year's actuals, your third and fourth. And again, we bill 4 times a year, not
Right.
twice a year. I mean, you know,
Yeah.
which is a smart way to do things, because now your cash flow is better, right? I'm getting revenue in sooner. So the override, when it, you know, based on, again, the Board of Assessors, this is more so the Board of Assessors, they would take into consideration that for the actuals.
Right.
Which
That's
is
correct.
due in, I can't even think now, February and May.
Right.
What-
And what's
what
very
this is called
painful-
is tax weeds. We're in the weeds so far that we may never see the other. It just gets so confusing, and
Here's the, and I
And
say
when
this
you're
all
old,
the time,
it's
and,
more
and I
confusing.
don't mean it to come across as any disrespect to any citizen, but municipal finance is all scripted out in state law. So when people say it doesn't make sense, in certain aspects they're correct. But when you look at the entire municipal and state finance calendar, unfortunately, it does all make sense. And that's why you have staff to do all this, because it is very, very hard to understand. And when people say, why is the federal budget in October? Like, it's all coordinated throughout. It doesn't feel that way, but it is. And there is literally, I also then say, there's nothing we can do about it. It is the way it is. And instead of trying to decide why don't we have a different system, it's more important to learn the system and learn how to maneuver within the system. And it's very, very hard. It takes a long time.
once you figure it out, it's actually quite clear as
It
to
is.
what happened. And
Through
I've
many
got a
years in
sheet
this,
somewhere
that's
that
exactly how I
should
feel
be-
about it. Because now, when you have it down pat after a long time, it's actually not that bad. But
Well, this is kind of the question that I think some people
Yep.
have asked, because there's, and I don't mean to go down an override rabbit hole, but there's some questions about should an election be in November?
Right.
And so that would be a totally different calendar than,
Nope.
No,
well, no, I mean, to retro it,
nope,
no?
no,
No.
because you're still, if you did it in November on an election day that already exists
Before, because you're before December.
correct.
before the tax rate gets
Oh,
set.
okay, right.
So you just wouldn't get your preliminary assessments. You would then just get the actuals in January, in May.
But isn't it too late on the budget year?
Nope. Well, it
Which
could
budget
be
year?
I mean,
because
so cause
it
we're,
could be.
July 1 is
Yeah.
this, when we need to start and
Yeah.
make the decision.
But
So
you
if you don't have an
have to
election
do it.
until November, I wouldn't say, yes, spend 81, because I don't know that I have the money to support it.
That's right. But you would go.
So just to go against, like, you wouldn't want the
yeah.
thing that late because it
Right.
doesn't make sense. You can't make a choice on the budget. So I'm just countering, like, the people who have made that point, like,
Yes.
sure, you can do it, and
Right.
you can put it on tax bills, but it
Right.
wouldn't be in time to make decisions properly for this school year.
For this school year, yeah. Right? Do you have it?
in the summer. Right.
We're saying a
Right,
November
I know.
vote,
You would-
a
if you-
November
so, yeah.
vote would not
Well,
help.
it's also if you know, again, if a June thing didn't work out or
Yeah.
failed, right? Again, level service is still there, okay? And by the time the state budget is done, you're really looking at a $4 million deficit for level service, okay? I would be willing to bet that from revolving funds and some other creative mechanisms, that you'd probably be able to, at least on July 1, count on level service, which is pretty good, actually, given the circumstances of what we're talking about. Not optimum. I'm not saying that that's optimum. I'm not saying that that's what we want.
I
but
thought you said
you-
it's level service plus,
That's what the school committee's budget wants.
oh, to
But
be
if
nine.
an override in June fails,
Yeah,
to your point, I'm bringing up the point that you
Yeah.
just brought up, on
Yeah.
July 1st,
Yeah.
if you don't want to go to November and you're planning on 81.3 million in a budget and it doesn't pass and you're spending like 81.3 million, yeah, that is a problem. Because eventually later on down the line, you're either going to have to drain your reserves and or make cuts and or look for alternative means to do whatever it is you're trying to do. But that, Natalie, is exactly the question and discussion this community needs to start having.
And just to go back again too, so say, again, you don't get the override for whatever reason, deferred or doesn't pass, and you say, let's try again November, but let's level service. If it doesn't pass again, now you're using up all this money to just make it work for something that may or may not pass. You're just deferring a problem and potentially putting the town in a worse position.
I'm gonna be a little,
Destroying the AAA
right there,
rating,
this
right?
slide
Based on
right
what he said
there
before.
has been showing that we've been kicking the can down the road for a long time anyway. So the idea and somehow that a shock is coming out of the system, oh my God, all of a sudden now, there's a big problem? Like, give me a break. Like, this has been going on for years.
I think
Like,
the
we've
shock
known
is
about
that
all
it's
this. And so you're right, Nat.
12%.
You're spot on. But the idea that all of a sudden this just came out of thin air yesterday is not correct. And everyone in this room and watching at home knows what I'm saying is accurate. So this is why this slide is up there. For a lot of new residents who moved here in the last year or 2 or 3 that have never paid attention to any of this stuff for years, this is important information. This has just been, let's just wait literally until we're at the cliff. And now we're at the cliff. And now we have to figure out as a community, how much more closer do we want to look over the cliff, or are we going to start having a dialogue to maybe walk back from the side of the cliff a little bit?
Got it.
And so ultimately, these are very, very hard and painful conversations publicly that are going to be very challenging. But it's not like this just came out of thin air. But you are correct in your assessment. Level service, I'm saying, as a stopgap. We may not be able to restore all the cuts. That's the optimum, right? But if you can't, my job is to have a plan B, a plan C, a plan D, a plan E, and a plan F, right? And I'm just laying out there right now and saying, like, if these things don't work out the way everybody wants them to, because we've waited till the last possible second to have a dialogue in the community on this stuff, openly, fairly, to get real input from people about how they feel about this stuff, like, can they afford those override costs in that middle column? We may be in a position where we may have to have a conversation for more than a week, maybe a year, to have the public understand the 4 corners of this puzzle about what's at stake for just level service. Because I believe, and I think the school committee believes, that if we don't restore the cuts from this fiscal year, that means there's a lot at stake. And I hope we would all agree with that, because I think that that's absolutely true. But if we're in a position on July 1 and the superintendent needs to know how much money does he have to spend for the whole school year, well, you know, at least there's some reserves to some degree to be able to try to pat some of those gaps to engage the community over the next, 6 to 12 months to look forward to FY26, which I've already presented, is not going to be any kinder than what we currently have. This slide up here is something people ask me about all the time too, because I've been getting emails about a $10 million override, which Newton failed last year on, by the way. But I put up the numbers. If you have the assessed value over on the side, current estimated tax bill, and the estimated tax impact, there are the numbers that are generally out there for a $10 million override that many people have been saying that we need. You just have to look at that chart. And if you have an $850,000 house, you're already paying a $10,000 tax bill, you're looking at a $1,000 tax increase. George?
Can I, 2 things.
Yep.
The estimated tax bill impact is yearly impact, not
Annual
quarterly.
impact. That's correct.
That's the first thing.
Oh, yeah.
Secondly, yes, no? He wanted to speak and,
We're past that point.
okay.
Should that slide that you just had, Jamie, and maybe this is for a different meeting, but include information about people who can get, what is it, not rebates, but decreased payments,
Yeah,
that they're
the
eligible for that?
Community assistance program.
Right,
Yeah.
which I think a lot of people are, I don't know the numbers off the top of my head of how many people we have, but I think that might be interesting
Yeah.
for some people who are looking at the $1,000 increase or et cetera,
Yeah.
think
or
the-
$400
doesn't the-
increase.
The impact.
That's true, Heather. And that's a great
I
point.
just
We'll
think
do
just
that.
to see that,
Absolutely.
just to,
Most of
yeah.
it's for utilities.
Yeah,
in that program, but there are some abatements for people who are
Abatements,
disabled.
that's the word I'm
Yeah,
looking for.
who are disabled or veterans, there's a whole, the assessors have a report on that stuff too. But we will absolutely,
yeah, yeah,
We will
yeah. I just
absolutely
think that
promote
that
that. It's a
topic
fantastic
is going to
point.
come up, and I think for marketing purposes, for people to understand it.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I just want to be clear about one thing though, because this question did come up.
Mm.
There is no ability for us to give a tax break on a property tax to people that are not already in state law that are allowed to have.
right.
So somebody who's disabled. So we
Right.
can't just create a graduated system, or can we give seniors a 50% tax break on this? Can't do that.
No, but there's the work program as well, right?
Yeah,
We offer that in Franklin.
Right, I just,
A lot of people use that because
it's already
really-
sold out.
Yeah.
Those are all, I'm not dissing the suggestion. What I don't want to give though is this tremendous amount of hope
False hope, yeah, gotcha.
that all of a sudden there are these ways to offset these costs for the average taxpayer. Like, there's very, very few people that qualify for this stuff.
Okay, maybe an asterisk at the bottom, look and see if you qualify, if you're interested
Absolutely.
for this. I would add something.
Absolutely. I'm not debating, I just don't want people watching at home
Maybe not
saying,
in
oh,
the
I can get a
graph,
50,
but-
25% break on taxes, because
Can I make one point here? Just so everybody knows, this committee has no authority over the override on or off or on.
Right.
We get a budget
information.
in May or whenever it
Budget
comes,
review.
whether there's an override in it or not. So this group may have its own opinions, but it has zero impact on whether it happens. Zero.
Question, Jamie.
But-
Oh, now we
Bill?
lost.
Bill?
Bill, I'm sorry, go
Sorry.
ahead, Bill.
No, go ahead.
Mr. Chair, I respectfully disagree. You have tremendous impact. You're dissing yourself.
No, I'm sorry, legal impact.
Legal impact, no, true, because you, as I understand it, through my years of experience,
Yeah.
you report to the town council, you ask and go into the deep dive on all the budgets, which is that information which then the users, the citizens, the residents, the taxpayers, can then use to make an informed decision. So you do have an impact, you have a key role, and don't dish yourself.
No,
Because then nobody will want to come to watch.
my point was that,
In
yes,
terms of an impact to say you vote for yet and you're in the approval process, no, you're not, which is why you're not on the meeting next week.
no,
It's just school committee and town council. School committee requested, town council is the actual approval process for them in terms of the date, the when, and, if, the when, and the what. But your stuff is very important. So don't dish yourself.
you're right in that we're the information thrasher, and the only one that looks at every damn line of the silly budget
Yep,
we look at.
we're gonna go through it.
And we do it, and I think we've done a decent job over the years, so.
You have.
I have a question.
Bill,
So on the assessed value, do you flex market rate valuations every year?
Not a question for me.
It's the assessors.
It's the
Because
assessors.
an assumption's made on a stable rate.
Right.
However, and I don't know where Franklin is, but where I came from,
Yeah.
they used to flex market rates every year on real estate. Is that what we do?
So I unfortunately cannot answer that question at all, but I can definitely go back to the Board of Assessors and get that answer.
Yeah.
100%.
Yeah.
And I'll tell you why I'm asking that, because I heard a startling statement today on the radio. It said the state of Massachusetts, for the first time, has hit 900,000 on average property value. And that is startling.
And there's one direction, Bill, up.
So,
We had this discussion last week at the council, supply and demand economics.
right,
People don't like the rent. If you don't like the rent, you need to build more units to bring the cost down.
but now here's my assumption then.
Yeah.
So you're going off an assessed value and here's what the rate is, but are we really dealing with the same numbers?
Well,
the assessment.
No, because of
Yes,
the
you are.
2.5%.
because
For two of the four, correct?
2 of the 4?
Billing statements.
Oh, billing statements, right.
So there is a potential for a bump after the second.
That's correct. That is correct. Especially if your property was assessed on the 5-year
That's what
cycle,
I'm getting
depending on where it's at in the cycle, yes, you could end up saying, oh, I remodeled the kitchen, I
Right.
built a deck, I put on a new roof. Well, your appraised value of your house is obviously gonna go
So
up. Therefore, these are just static illustrative numbers,
Yes.
right, Bill? Yeah.
But what I'm trying to wrap around is a whole person concept of what's hitting you besides this. You know, inflation, cost of goods,
Yep.
et cetera, because that's real life.
Right.
And that's the panic
That's right.
that's gonna hit when you come asking for more, regardless of what it is. People automatically are gonna jump off that cliff saying, oh, sure, I just spent $7 on a box of Cheerios, and now,
Yep.
because that's the whole person concept.
Bill, you and I have known each other a long time
Yes.
now. You were an excellent financial person, and you predicted my next slide.
Thank you.
Overall financial impacts to citizens. And I didn't even list inflation.
Did I write that?
I didn't even list inflation. It was like you knew exactly where I was going with it. So this is just the list with updated numbers of the other guaranteed new increases for this year. So the $198 is up there. $10 per household on average for stormwater. $50 we need to have for the trash and recycling needs to go up this year. PFAS remediation is requiring us to do an 8, 8, and 8 water rate increase, which is about $50 per household. And then I have the ones below the already funded, right? Like already approved. The sewer rate increase for the Beaver Street Interceptor, the debt exclusion for Tri-County, and more along the lines of what you were just saying, Bill, but it's not up there. But the municipal aggregation for the last 3 years was 10 cents in town. Now it's 15, right? Which is still a really good rate, by the way, for 2 more years. So people are feeling that 5 cents in their electric bills, right? And then you add on top of this list, which I have no control over, these ones I do, the box of Cheerios, right? All of the other inflationary aspects.
House insurance.
House insurance.
They're forecasting
Right.
a record
Right,
increase,
right,
just unstable values
right.
for house insurance.
All of the things that, right.
But because the override is in place, in Massachusetts, because the 2.5 is in place, you wouldn't actually see too much of an increase because you can't do too much of an increase on your
Exactly.
property taxes at this
Exactly.
point. So even if you're assessed at a different, you're 600 now, you're assessed 800 later, it doesn't matter because your payment shouldn't really change too much because we can't
If
do
you
that.
vote for an override.
When you're at 2.5.
Only once though, only that one time, and then you
Well-
still have to follow the 2.5
Yeah, but
every
you
year
have
after
to
that.
factor out, we're not in a static one-year living mode and then you die.
Right.
That's what I'm trying to get to.
But I'm saying you're not going to have
I mean,
this
we solve a
increase
problem
every
for
year.
a year, but you gain a problem for 5 or 10.
At some point,
I don't know.
to your point and yours,
Yeah.
at the local level, we are capped at 2.5%.
Right.
And I'm not trying to over-exaggerate. Congressional inaction for 20 years has told the public we can't figure out anything, so states have been taking more ownership over problems. PFAS is a perfect example. The federal government didn't make any EPA relations on PFAS until last week. The state of Massachusetts made them 4 years ago, made a mandate, right? The state of Massachusetts and the federal government still haven't banned PFAS from being used or manufactured. But somehow we're supposed to go spend tens of millions of dollars to go clean it up. When lead was like this, they banned lead paint, right? And they said, over time, we need you to get Title V, septic, right? They said, we're going to put in a law, and over time, you're going to phase it out. They didn't force you to do it all that 1 year when Title V went into existence. Now, Congress can't even ban the chemical. Why? Because consumer products would tank. Because we're all eating and drinking PFAS every day. Makeup, jackets, Teflon-coated pans. How are we going to fry our eggs every morning if we can't, right? So I'm kind of serious. Like, if you can't ban the chemical, but you're making us raise water rates, so all of that work and all of those unfunded mandates are just continually coming down to the local level. To your point, Bill, inflation and what people are feeling, but we're at 2.5%, right? That's why you're seeing this as a statewide problem. It's not just Newton and Dedham and Haverhill with the teacher unions and strikes and stuff like that, but what we know we need, like in Newton, We know we need mental health counselors in our schools. We know we need social workers. We know we need library. We need all this stuff. But how do you pay for it? And the federal and state government had pushed it down to the local level, to the one place that we just can't go make money.
Because they regulate.
That's why Acton's looking for a $7 million override. Easton's looking at an override in a year and a half, right? Just read the paper. Belmont just passed one for $8.4 million.
So
Belmont, and it was only 55% of the vote voted in favor. So it's not like the public consensus on all this stuff is all there, you know? And it doesn't mean to be a rant on PFAS. I'm all for clean drinking water. But no one anywhere is, except for at the local level, I think, is sitting there going, who the hell's paying for all this stuff and how are we paying for it? But people are they're just passing law, like the EPA last week just said, oh, we're gonna do PFAS. Who the hell's paying for all this stuff? Right. And that's why your point, Bill, but your point, Heather, are actually pretty similar, because it's like we're restricted in what we can do.
Yeah.
Right? But yet the costs are going up for the average taxpayer through the roof.
Enormous.
So you had written a letter recently, I think it was published to the has there been any response? I mean, you're not the only person, I'm sure, that's written that letter. But saying exactly what you're saying right now, you're pushing it to our level. What are you gonna do, state, to help?
Part of the problem is that you have so many people that are up lobbying Beacon Hill or Congress
so many
to do
things.
so much. Someone somewhere, I don't know who it is, but someone somewhere has to just say, time out. Like, enough with the new ideas, enough with all that we know we need. Like, I've been saying it here for a long time. You guys have all heard me rant about this forever. But we know what we need, because we're so intelligent and smart. I mean, of course we know everything. The roads should be fixed perfectly. Sidewalks should be maintained perfectly. I mean, everything, right? Like, we all know what the schools need. I'm not arguing with their vote or their number. I mean, they need all that. I agree. But who the hell's actually saying how you're going to pay for it?
Right.
Before you end up putting yourself in a financial peril where you then have no reserves, you then lower your bond rating, you then go into a fiscal spiral, and people like me usually aren't very popular because we're the ones saying, hey, like I have for many, many years, saying, why did we wait till the end of the cliff?
And so the majority of the reason, if I'm understanding it right, it comes down to mandates as well, right?
Absolutely.
I mean, these things are the stormwater, whatever, all of those things are
Stormwater, even special
required.
education is something in law we have to do.
Yeah.
But they're not funding, the state's not funding the circuit breaker at a full amount. It's just like regional school transportation. They're paying 90% of it, but the district is still on the hook for the other 10% because everything in state law, as Amy knows really well, is subject to appropriation. So when you saw my first slide about the state budget, that's why I let off with that. They've had 8 of 9 months where they haven't had proper tax collections. I'm just telling you right now, you know, unless something big comes and some big corners turn, which Amy and I both know really takes a long time to develop where the revenues come back up, we're stuck with a sluggish economy because of high interest rates, and we literally have a completely frozen housing market, like just frozen solid.
And have
Seniors
you seen
can't
this
move
before
because they
in
can't
your-
find a house. Like George can't find a smaller, you know, unit if he doesn't want to live in the one family anymore, right? The turnover among housing is almost non-existent. And so you're not getting new units for empty nesters to fill with new younger families to bring kids into the district. And that's why you see the school district enrollment numbers are still going down through 2030. Because nowhere to go. That's why 250,000 people have left Massachusetts in the last 3 years. It's just simply like, it's to $900,000 average.
Correct.
Average.
That was stunning.
The average home in Belmont is like 1.5 million. I don't remember what it was in Wellesley. 1.2. Newton's at 1.5. Average. I have one more slide, Mr. Chair.
Okay, I was gonna say,
Crystal
let's
ball,
get back
people
to
ask
this.
me.
We're not gonna solve the
Nope.
problems
So
of the
people ask me all the
world
time,
No,
what else
maybe
is
though, maybe.
What else is coming up? Police station, PFAS mandates, stormwater phosphorus plan, and then the Davis-Thayer issue. You know, if the municipality keeps that, the only way to renovate that building is through the debt sleeve. There's just literally no money. You'd have to raise taxes to renovate it and maintain it, and then sunset. That's probably one, George, that would probably be a 30 or 40 year, because the expense to that is so big. And that's really it, so.
Did you say you're gonna post these slides?
I think, is
And
this?
they'll probably go through it sometime next week too.
Okay.
Is it on the agenda next week?
I'll pick, Lucas and I will try to work together next week when he gets back to try to put some pieces together,
All right.
so. Happy to entertain any questions.
Huh? No.
Have you, in your,
I-
in your career, have you seen a cycle like this? That you could compare it to?
26 years, no. I
You've
mean,
not in-
08 and 09 was a recession, that's different.
Yeah.
But
So
I think
Prop
we
two and a
have
half came about in the 80s,
1980 right after the
right?
last big wave of inflation.
Was that kind of this last time this cycle would be similar? I don't think property values were that high then, so I don't think that would be, I don't know.
I think we just did a better job of living within our means probably back then.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, we can make excuses all we want.
No, I was just
mean,
curious if
not,
you've
I'm just saying,
seen
like, I
this.
don't, I haven't, I mean,
This has
inflation
nothing to
also
do with
hasn't
our
been,
budget. Let's
inflation also
move
hasn't
on.
been that high like this.
move on.
Yeah. Oh, okay.
Okay, let's get,
Sure.
I mean, we could spend all night talking about that, you know, what happened 100 years ago.
But to answer your question, not really. These kind of pressures are pretty intense. Pretty.
Okay, so you done with the town administrator's FY budget? The override request that was in our packet.
That was just there
It's not an
referentially.
official one, right? That was just from, it was signed by just 2 members of the committee. Did the committee vote?
I don't know.
what they? Okay, we don't
I think
know.
they, as part of their budget, that was what came out of it, and they sent a letter to fully fund the budget.
Okay, but there's no, that the council can act on anytime in a week. State House News Act, is that,
Wait, I'm sorry, can I just go back to that? So by
What?
next week, we will have, you don't know the answer to this, I don't think. We will not, we may or may not have a formal request from the school committee going to the council.
I'm about fairly, Steve?
Since I'm going back and forth in multiple meetings, I can connect those dots. So, and since I also talked with Tom Mercer, the town council chair, on Thursday after the council meeting, he talked about the 24th, that meeting. We did the walkthrough today, so that'll happen. May 1st is the date. He had said the council was going to be voting to make a decision. Things may still change, but that was the time. He wanted the 24th to be the input from the community, to give them more information, the yays and nays, the various ideas, the timing. There's certainly folks out there that want to talk about November. For me, schools are going to go through, hell if they wait till November, because they're going to have to make all the cuts now. And then, in the middle of the school year, try to come back, assuming it passes, in the middle of the school year. Is that good for the kids? Enough of a side. So, in terms of the cycle, and interviewed the school committee chair, vice chair last night, that's the chalkboard chat, that's coming out. That's why they stood up at the council meeting last week. Remember, they read the letter to formally give it to the council. It did not get a full vote from the committee, but there was consensus in the committee passing the budget, hence the letter to go. So to Chair's point, no, there wasn't a vote. They didn't really think they needed to. The letter was requested per Jamie's process, so that's what they presented verbally, and then you got a copy of it. So that's, hopefully it ties the dots.
Thank you. I think it's challenging, as you said earlier, Steve. Our job is to kind of help dissect the information and kind of just ask the right questions, and it's so challenging when it just seems like it's quicksand underneath us. Like, what are we really dissecting? Because TBD. So Jamie, I think you've done a really great job of saying, here's a bunch of hypotheticals, and we're planning, depending on what happens. But it'll be an interesting meeting next week, because I don't know how you send in a group of people with kind of no basis to kind of ask questions on, like no firm basis. Like there's so many different things that could go on, so it'll be challenging. So thanks to everyone kind of doing their best to with the information we have, because it's challenging.
That's why I wanted to do that tonight,
Yeah.
at least a week ahead, just to get some chat started, because, you know, it's hard. It takes a lot of courage to go out to the public and ask for this kind of a question. And I think the urgency is, you know, I mean, we have to move really quick. And some decisive decision-making has to happen. And if we can't get a copy of the facility study before this stuff starts, we're walking into an unknown with quicksand. I mean, this isn't really a critique as much as it is just a simple common sense statement. We know the numbers. We know the issues. We've talked about them for years. We need to make a decision. And if we don't, because we've gone up to the inch before the cliff, I think, Natalie, we agree, I think we all do, we need to do something quick, or else we are going to lose progress, both schools and the municipality, on a lot of stuff that our team and community has worked incredibly hard to develop. The chief of police, just for example, today joked at our department heads meeting, it's in the budget narrative, he said to all of us, he goes, anybody get pulled over recently? And if you look in the budget narrative, the additional police officers that we've hired have resulted in almost a 100% increase in traffic stops, okay? People complain, more than schools, you guys know this, about speeding in town.
Yep.
I actually have not gotten a lot of calls. I can go a week now, right, Amy? You were even last summer. We get a call every day. People stop in, you know, yelling and screaming about speeding. Now people are getting pulled over. The good news is they're not giving out tickets yet. They're giving out the warnings. But now that the warnings are there, people do need to slow down. We can't move back on something just like that. And I could obviously go for 2 hours about all the impacts, but we can't move backward. The urgency is there. But we all in this room, in the school community, everybody have to show that urgency too. These are unpopular decisions to make. We're not alone in these. But it's time to make some decisions about facilities, about fees. We can't just keep kicking it down anymore. We're at the cliff. We've got to do it. So I appreciate that comment a lot. Oh, Nicole has a... Nicole? And Sue?
Yeah, just a couple quick clarifying points. Did you say for the override, does the school committee have to put forth the recommendation for the vote, or is can the town council just do it based on what they hear next week and these meetings? Like, is there a sequential step there, or is it mostly in the hands of the town council?
That's a great question, Nicole. There's no legal requirement for a request. I'm not going to speak. I'm not going to speak for Amy. I'm not going to speak for Amy. No, I'm not. But we've been doing this a long time. I have never seen a board of selectmen or a town council in my career ever say we're going to put a ballot initiative on that is school related without the school committee somewhere present. I mean, it's just, I'm sorry, it's just absurd. I feel like to some degree, it's like, how do I escape just not doing that? So there's no legal requirement, Nicole, but you know, schools generally don't like towns involved in their policy, okay? It's just the way it goes. I can tell you, Wellesley superintendents, Southborough, Hopkinton, Acton, Boxborough, anywhere I've been where I've done overrides, the superintendent walks into the room, the school committee says, we need this much money for A, B, C, D, and E purposes, put it on the ballot. And the Board of Selectmen and the council, Board of Selectmen always says, okay. And they put it on the ballot. But to put an override on and have the council field questions about what it's for is completely disingenuous. The school committee and the school superintendent have to define the terms of what they're looking for. And they kind of partially have done that in that letter, right? They said we voted on an $81.3 million budget. We want the council to fully fund it, including possibly an override if needed, right? So we need them to really come out and say, this is what we need, this is why we need it, and this is what we're gonna do, and this is what the purpose is. And I think probably over the next couple of weeks, they'll do that, is my guess. I guess
Okay.
next week we'll hopefully have that.
And then just a real quick follow-up on the facilities analysis, where we talk about it'd be great to see the outcome of that before we make any decisions. And is it fair to say that the benefits of any sort of outcome of a facilities analysis, if we choose to move forward with what that plan looks like, are the realization of those benefits are probably in future years, that we would still be in the same situation, that we would need the current override? Like, I get that they're integrated, but it also feels like regardless of that, you're not gonna realize any benefits of what that facilities analysis might be, that there's still a need for a short-term
Yep.
resolution to the budget deficit, if that makes sense.
It does, Nicole, and I will say this. Could you imagine if you're the chief of police, or you're the fire chief, or you're the DPW director, or the facilities director, or the library director, or the senior center director, or the rec director, or any department head, and your budget gets cut and you lose staff because Parmenter or the facility study isn't done if an override doesn't pass? I'm just trying to contextualize this for people, right? I agree. If the facility study shows FY26, I agree with you, Nicole. In a best case scenario, you'd realize those savings down the road. That would help with the deficits in 26 and 27. And I think the schools fairly need time to be able to figure out what they need, where people are going, communicate with the public. Clearly, they need the time. I think in an optimum scenario, that would be the case. I'm just trying to ask you to project out what you're going to see, that if an override does not pass for FY25 and you have to cut municipal staff, imagine how those departments are going to feel in addition to their constituencies if the facilities analysis doesn't get done anytime soon, or worse, we don't agree with the recommendations and we're back to ground zero on this whole thing yet again for the 4th time in 5 years. It doesn't feel very good. And I'm sure this microphone right here, Steve will be getting up and down, up and down, up and down, because you're going to hear a lot of angry people at that mic saying, you've had years to deal with this, you haven't dealt with it, you waited to the last possible second, maybe the 15th hour, and now you're going to go cut cops. I don't think if you're the union or if you're a police officer, I don't think that's going to feel good. And I just want to make sure I'm clear about this. There really should not be a scenario in FY25 where we're laying off any police officers or firefighters. But if you're if you're the other department that gets cut, and you're those stakeholders, you're kind of looking going, right? So I have to put that out there to say, before we start cutting municipal budgets and school budgets, I think we need the answers to what's going on with this. Because quite frankly, as all of you know, you guys all know the answer. Nicole, you were on the redistricting committee. You actually know what to do. It's been documented for a while. We've got to just do it.
Yep.
Right, Sue? We just got to do it.
On the redistricting, several meetings in the past, I said, gee, the police department did a good job thinking outside the box with the 4x10. Saved a bunch, they technically didn't save money, but they enhanced the patrol force with that money. The fire department thought outside the box, put in another level of management, believe it or not, but still saved some money because they redistributed the thing. I said that at the meeting where I said, school enrollment has dropped 25% and the budget has
33.
gone up, how many?
33.
33. And the budget's gone up since that time 60% or more. It's gone from 50-ish million to 80 million. That's a lot of money. And yet we've lost 33% of the kids. Now, I understand there's all kinds of other things. But I'm sitting home today. I'll redistrict for you today. You draw a line right down Pleasant Street, down Beaver Street, and out to Grove Street. You change Keller Sullivan to a grades 1 through 5 or 6, depending. You change Remington Jefferson to the same thing, 1 through 5 or 6. You take the other kids, the 6th, 7th, 6th, I don't know, could go either way. 7th, 8th, 9th, right through high school, and you put them all at Oak Street. Every one of them, Oak Street, both the high school and the thing. You close Parmenter, and then you reuse Kennedy for maybe the ECDC or kindergarten, or a daycare, or whatever you want to do. It's the newer building of the two. Redistricting is done. Done. We don't have to go street by street because you got 6 buildings to deal with. You got 3 buildings to deal with. That's it. It's done. But we've been listening for, it's been 5 years. Nicole was on the committee. It took 5 years to, we have done nothing in 5 years. I'm sorry, I'm ranting, but it's frustrating to sit and hear it. We got to redistrict, and now we're going to study the buildings again. Damn it, we know what the buildings look like. We've got principals that can tell you every classroom, every ounce of their buildings. But we gotta hire some $150,000 Kettle Booze or whatever the name of the company is to come in and do it for us. Damn, don't we have Mike?
Yeah.
We've got the people here. We just don't do it. And I'm sorry, but I gotta pick a bit on the schools. They don't do it. The town has done it over and over. The police, the fire, and I mentioned them all. You know, and, okay, the chairman of the finance committee is frustrated. I can see a former member of the committee who we don't always agree. She and I have had discussions about the school budget, but get the big one out of the way, the redistricting. And that's a simple redistrict. If you live north of Beaver Street, you go to Kellis, Remington Jefferson. You live south of it, or the reverse, north or south, whatever. One of you go to two buildings, and then the maintenance goes down. The utilization of teachers, the teacher utilization. You don't panic when you lose a kindergarten teacher because they're all in 2 places, and you can swap or move or whatever you got to do. It's simple. Come on, guys. All right, I'm sorry. But Sue,
I just want, may I?
you
I
may.
know everybody wants to go home, and I do too.
I didn't eat
wanna hear
dinner,
you
so I'm
first.
hungry,
You know,
so.
who doesn't want to? All right, hi, everybody. It's so nice to be here, I have to say. I was on Zooms all day, so I really wanted to come in. Just one quick comment, because I've done a lot of budget reading. And I don't know if anybody else found this confusing, but Jamie, when I was reading, you have a page in there called the voting document. But I noticed that the department requests and the town admin recommend are the exact same numbers.
Yep.
Would it, well, can you explain to me why you wouldn't have put in, like, say, the school recommendation of,
Yeah, I'll be happy to answer that. Because they vote on their budget way too late. And I've said this for years. April 9th, when my budget comes out on April 12th, is too late. I will give Lucas and everybody a lot of credit, and Bob, they have tried their best to try to get it earlier. I know they're working really, really hard on it. Every department in town gives me their budget by the middle of January. So they foresee the costs in the future. Number 2, I specifically told every municipal department, no new spending. So unless there's a fee for service type deal and we need to have a part-timer, like Ryan, Jim McLaughlin, the senior center, like I'm just using those as examples, those bring in a lot of revenue, right? In fact, most people don't understand most of those budgets are paid for by revenues. It actually has very little operating budget impact. The budget book and the voting document were produced 3 or 4 weeks ago, and I already emailed a couple people back who caught that error, and this finance director is going to put in there 81.3 million and change it. But everywhere else in the budget document has 81.3 million.
thank you.
Everywhere else does. And I'm just saying it, sometime I hope the schools can get us a budget earlier than 3 days before I put out mine.
Is there a reason?
I don't think that's a lot to
Have they
ask.
given you a reason? Are they waiting on information?
It's usually just their timeline. Every other
It'd be good to
depart,
just
every
know
other
that.
department
Yeah.
in this town gives me a budget by the middle of January. And it used to be, as Brian and Steve and Kerry
It's a shame
remember,
you
and
can't.
Sue remembers, it used to be New Year's Eve. But in the pandemic, I started giving everybody 2 or 3 more weeks till about Martin Luther King Day. You know, and I understand school budget is, you know, 3 to 1, you know, almost. So I understand there's a lot more cost drivers. There's a lot more state policies and unfunded mandates they have to track. I understand why they're doing it that late. But that one issue in terms of their request, we didn't change it because all the production got done. It was
Sorry,
complete-
Jamie, you said you understand why they're giving it to you that late?
No, I understand that the typo that was in there. What Sue's pointing out is, if you look at the budget book, the 180-page, but the actual book, in there it says departmental request. We did that processing 4 weeks ago when I gave my final decisions on my numbers. Our team had already prepared it all. It was a complete oversight on our staff to not go back and change that number. But I'm also complaining that I get it 3 days before I'm about to put out my budget. To go back into everything we've done is just, we have so many things going on, as I'm sure all of you can understand and Sue understands. We're writing, you know, a 300-page budget, and the last few days, you know, we're all zoned out trying to get typos and making sure we correct everything and everything's right. There's just so much to look at. We just didn't go back into the budget book to reflect the vote that took place at about 9 p.m. on Tuesday. By the time I got my budget out on Friday, which was really Thursday, we just didn't go back and change the departmental request, technically. I've already forwarded that to Chris Sandini. They're gonna change that number. But the rest of the budget narrative has the right numbers. And all of the links I provide in there, which is what I traditionally do, I don't write a lot in my budget narrative because I leave that to the schools. I just link it to their materials, which all has the correct information. But I am making a plea at some point. I think we all have to work a little stronger to hopefully get me those numbers, you know, school department budget a little earlier than a couple days before.
Well, I think that correction would be actually very helpful in the scenario that we're in right now.
The voting document will have
So
their
many
request.
people. That's awesome. All right, thank you. That was my only comment.
Sure.
Thank you all
Thank
for
you.
doing what you do. I appreciate it.
I'll speed through. The quarter-to-date report, do you guys, Kerry or Jamie, have
Just-
any concerns about, there are a couple that have, like, I looked at the ones that were greater than 50%.
Yeah.
Not a big deal. I didn't see anything that bothered me. I found one that had already spent 101 or 104 or something, but my guess is that's some craziness.
Right.
So there's nothing of concern in that list, yes?
No.
Okay.
Nope.
Do you have the, it says revised budget, but do we have what it was before it was revised?
What do you mean?
Well, it would be on the budget.
Like,
here.
as an example, it says revised budget says, 6,000. Is that what they're revising it is to right now? You've revised it to say the
This-
budget is
this is-
6,000.
Yeah.
But this is last year's budget.
Oh, all right, I see what you're saying.
This is spent against.
They're the
Oh,
current budget. It's the current budget.
My
is what
apologies.
we
That's okay.
I understand now.
Yep.
I'm sorry for misunderstanding that.
And technically, Heather, there was a revision to the budget last July to get
Yeah.
the schools up to the 2.5%,
Yeah.
you know, increase. So that probably reflects that.
Yeah.
All right, stabilization report was just a list of balances. I looked at them. In my humble opinion, they're fine. DOR releases 2004 statewide median household.
Bill will have a field day with that one.
Yeah, go with that.
Just an interesting, if you click on the link, it goes to a map and you can look around at all the housing prices in Massachusetts. It's just kind of fun.
Okay.
It is. I really like this stuff.
Anything else? Anyone?
I'd just like to say, in regards to the redistricting conversation, I think that, I know Nicole was on the committee, but I think that it's a much bigger project than the police department shifting some staff or some fire department.
no
You're
doubt.
dealing with,
But it's been going on 5 years.
But has it
Longer.
actively been going on? There was a pandemic in the middle there. There was a lot of shuffling. We had a different superintendent 5 years ago. So a lot of things have changed, and I think it's critical to look at that when you're thinking about, I understand your point. I do, I
mean,
get that you've been hearing it, but I also think that it's a much bigger project than a restructuring in a smaller
Is
department.
it bigger project because we're
Because
looking
there's
at
families and
6
people
different-
involved.
But-
Yeah, but there's also 6 buildings to be redistricted. What I'm saying is reduce the number of buildings down.
I think when you're dealing with something that's going to impact the public, you're going to have a much bigger project than if you're dealing with something that's just an interdepartmental scale down.
Fully, I understand that's George's opinion.
No, George, and fair enough, this is Heather's opinion.
Yep.
So I just wanna,
Yeah.
I think that redistricting is a much bigger topic than just draw the line in the sand, because it
guess
impacts so many people.
My frustration is there's 5 years of.
I
and
think
I
actually
understand pandemic and all
I think
that
you're both right.
Yeah, I mean, that's honestly part of what you're saying is what slowed it down. Like, I don't want my kid to go there, and I'm gonna fight tooth and nail. And it's like, at some
Absolutely.
point of the day, we need the school committee to be more decisive
And remember,
in the
we've had
greater good.
school committee changes every 2 years, we've had a new superintendent,
Yeah.
so there's various
There's lots of
people
things,
involved
but
in
there's so much
changes,
emotion involved in it
whereas
that-
the
yeah.
chief of police and the chief of fire have
That's
been there
not really
forever,
true,
right?
though. I mean, I
So-
just gotta say, a 4x4 schedule is extremely unique. You still have to collectively bargain it. Is it, Heather, you are correct. Is that easier to do than a redistricting plan? No question, okay? Both are very challenging within their own right,
Absolutely.
okay? But what George is saying is the chief of police in the town saw the cliff coming.
I think the schools did too. I think that's fair to say.
If-
We've been talking about it and they've been present.
I agree. But now we're in the predicament we're in. And 2 years ago in my budget narrative, I wrote, the ice is getting thinner and thinner. And the more we get thinner and thinner, the more that one issue that's unforeseen comes in, like inflation, like geopolitical tensions, like state revenues, and people tighten up. I told everybody for years, don't wait till the cliff. Everybody waited for the cliff. I understand exactly what you're saying, and you are right. Redistricting is extremely challenging. It impacts every parent, impacts everyone. But and Lucas has done a fantastic job, and Tina trying to get to this point now. But what George is also saying is, this issue has lingered around for a decade, okay? My predecessor was writing about this way before I was hired, okay? We have chosen, the school committee previously and others have chosen, maybe for good reason, to wait. And the community needs to understand, whether it's new people on the school committee or whether it's new superintendents, we pay the superintendent and you pay me to be a leader and make decisive decisions on these things.
Right, and to
And
just
the pandemic,
walk
by
the
the
fine
way,
line.
and I understand the pandemic was tough. I'm
It's the community that didn't bring forth
I'm aware
an
of that.
override, not necessarily he said, she said. It's also the entire town of Franklin didn't do anything since your predecessor and
Right.
whatnot, right? Overrides have been voted down in previous years,
The last
so-
one was 2014 for just
Right.
roads.
They've all been
The
said
last
no.
one for schools was in 2010.
So it's not just to
But-
blame it on anybody, it's
Right.
the entire town is at fault. We saw
Right.
this, everybody saw this coming, right? So I think we're all in this together
Yeah.
type of thing,
Yeah.
and we need to be together.
That was the name of my memo
on
a
it.
couple months ago. We're all
Yeah.
in this together,
I
but
think that's the way it
we
is.
still don't really have a date. So, at some point, we're gonna continue to do this
Yep.
until someone stands up, and I've said it too many times, so nobody wants to listen to me, Jaw, anymore. I mean, I'm sick of listening to myself way more than you guys are. Okay? I've been a broken record. So nobody can say, oh, geez, we didn't know this was coming. Okay? And again, during the pandemic, a little different, the council still went forward with community preservation. There was a model in 2020 right there for the voters to tap into. Heather, I respect and understand the difficulties of the pandemic, but at some point, we have to turn the corner. And
There was a
people have to
leadership
become
change, and
leaders,
I think
people
that's
have
critical to
and
know.
people have to become leaders and say, we know the answers, and we've got to go present those solutions to the community And unfortunately, you know, I believe it's a little too late, but water is under the bridge. We're gonna go next week at the meeting, we're gonna get public feedback on an override, and I certainly hope the outcome is not more paralysis. Because if you don't vote on May 1st on an override, you ain't getting it by the end of June. Adjourn?
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
Roll call after. Nicole?
Hang on, sorry, I was muted. George,
Yes.
Natalie,
Yes.
Nicole is yes, Heather,
Yes.
John,
Yes.
William,
Yes.
Chenna,
Yes.
and Mike.
Yes.
Thank you.
See you, Nicole.
See you, Nicole.
Undebatable.